Be the right club. Be the right club today. Yes!
Again, has to be careful of the speed.
What a comeback season for Hal Sutton.
Come right back toward the hole. How about in? That's the second eagle he's made it for this week.
17 years later, Hal Sutton is the Players' Champion.
He's got it going right at the flagstick. It'll be up. It is.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Be the Right Club Today podcast. Hal, you were away last week. What were you up to?
Went and did a couple of outings. I went to Firestone and played an outing with Hale Irwin and Tom Kite and Larry Nelson and Peter Jacobson and
Awesome.
Gary Koch. And then did another outing while I was up there, which was for the Ronald McDonald House in Cleveland, which has been around for 40-some-odd years. And Mike Klieg started that a long time ago, and it's been an incredible fundraiser for the Ronald McDonald House, and he passed away a couple of months ago, and so it was a tribute to him in many ways. He was a mentor to many people in Cleveland, and to be at the dinner that night and hear all these grown men talk about how he had mentored them both personally and professionally and how much he meant to them. He was a pillar in the community of Cleveland, and meant so much to so many people. So that was a big loss, but it will continue on. His legacy will continue.
Such a great cause.
Such a great cause. And, they show videos of what it's meant to people, families, and, in crisis, when your child is sick, it's crisis.
Sure, absolutely. I have to ask, because everybody's interested. You played twice. How did you? I know you don't play much, but how'd you hit it?
Well, I tell you, I don't play much. And the first day we played was a golf course I haven't seen, and I walked, and the wind was blowing about 30 miles an hour. So welcome back, Hal. But anyway, it was funny. I said to Hale Irwin and I were sitting together, and I said something to him about, "Do you play much golf anymore, Hale?" And he said, "No." I said, "Why not?" He said, "'Cause 76 wasn't any fun then, and it's still not any fun." I thought that was a pretty good response.
That is great, and it's actually a perfect segue into the podcast today about managing expectations.
Yeah.
How do you, kind of a little bit off the cuff question, but how do you, and Hal Irwin and a Peter Jacobson and a Larry Nelson, how do you handle expectations now, coming from a place where you played at such a high level for so long?
I actually have a harder time handling it now than I did whenever I was younger. And I think the reason why is because I don't do enough about trying to make my game better now. Yeah. And
at least back then you were working on it.
At least back then I was working on my game all the time. Now I'm working on everybody else's game, and mine gets no attention, but yet I go out on the golf course and I still have a reputation I want to live up to.
Yeah.
And, honestly, I can't live up to that reputation anymore. Right. And that's frustrating.
Sure. One of the things that I think is so fascinating about what we're going to talk about today is just how so many people have such a misconception of what is real with stats and what the best players in the world are actually doing. It's something we see and hear all the time. Parents thinking that their kid should make every 5-footer that they have, or hit it to a certain proximity to the hole from a certain distance, and that's going to be a heavy topic today for us. But I kind of joked with you before we started today. If I would have had some of these stats that they have now, I would have been I'd have still been hard on myself, but I would have, my targets would have definitely changed. And this goes back to a lot of what Scott Fawcett says. But I know I would have allowed myself, I would have been easier on myself when I hit bad shots. I know that for sure.
Well, one of the things that I've said around here a lot of times is Tiger frustrated all of us when he told us he beat us with his C game. And, the world heard that. The rest of the players on the tour heard that and thought that was insulting in a way. Yeah. It was really what he was saying is I manage my game better than I normally do. And that led me to say to you, I don't think I played my best but 2 or 3 times a year. And that didn't always equate to a win.
Yeah.
So you need to think about that. And what I spent most of my life doing on the tour, and let me make sure you understand that, most of my life on the tour, I managed what I had, which was less than I wanted. And so one of the things that I would appeal to everybody out there to do is to make sure you inventory your game and manage what you have. And, I don't think, stats has allowed us to do that better. But the normal person out there, you don't have all these stats. Yeah. You don't know, you probably don't even inventory around when you get through and say, well, I only had, 4 putts inside 20 feet.
Well, and it's always these generic stats like, oh, I had 34 putts today. And then you look back and it's like, oh, well, I hit 16 greens and the closest birdie putt I had was 20 feet. Like, you're destined to have that many putts.
Right.
The other thing, and again, this is, it's kind of a stat that you're not super proud of, but at the same time, I think it puts everything into perspective. You had a Hall of Fame career. You won 14 times on the PGA Tour, and you played in, I think we looked up the stat at one time, you played in 700-plus events or whatever it was, and you missed like 300-plus cuts. And it's like, again, that was... Like when I first played on the mini tours, I was like, if I don't win, it was a failure. And if I missed the cut, I needed to change. Like I had to go out there and be successful every week. And it just doesn't exist. And so, we have to parallel that, in my opinion, to these amateurs and to these kids at home that are listening at home or that we work with that like, guys, it's just impossible to play well week in and week out. Tiger was the only one that came close to doing it in 2000 and then a little run in like 07, 08. But even then, he still didn't win every event. He just didn't.
Well, Tiger's the only guy that ever played the game that didn't have a bad year.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look back, all the great players, including Jack Nicklaus, he had a few bad years.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was...
Well, it was before it would have been a couple years before he won the Masters in 83 or 4.
Well,
right?
I was thinking it was like 78, 79, and 80, but he won the U.S. Open in 80. We should have that exact stat. But anyway, he had a couple of bad years.
Right.
And you look back at Tiger's career, he didn't, he was almost top 10 on the money list every year that he played.
I mean, when you're on ESPN for missing the cut, you've been playing really good. You never see ESPN never runs Dustin Johnson missing the cut or even like Phil Mickelson missing the cut. It's just not news, and it was when he did.
Well, I mean, he's not standard.
Yeah.
You can't even no one can be compared to Tiger Woods. It was unfair. I mean, I'm going to say this publicly. I was compared to Jack Nicklaus, and that was unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, an unproven person. I mean, you can't put that sort of thing on people.
Right.
And, we see it, like you said, we see parents doing that to their children all the time. My dad read that, and he thought what every other parent thought whenever they read that. It's like, oh, my God, I got to really put the heat on Hal. I can't let him up.
Yeah.
And
managing expectations.
Yeah, managing.
It's
I mean,
brutal.
It was all of a sudden his expectations went from here to here.
Yeah.
Because of what somebody else said.
Yeah.
I mean, let's let the water flow where the water flows.
Stick to the process. Same thing, Tiger. Same thing. Jordan talked about it a lot. Instead of focusing on the result, focusing on what could happen, you got to stick to the process. The rest of the podcast is going to be, I'm gonna talk about a lot of these different stats and then get your take and we'll talk about it. So it's gonna get a little heavy into some of these numbers. We got all these numbers you can find them on the PGA Tour website. PGA Tour does a great job of allowing you to go in and look at what you want to look at. And honestly, it's fascinating to me from a couple different areas. One, from a brand awareness standpoint or an inventory awareness standpoint, something Hal talks about a lot in that. Go look at your favorite player and look at his brand. Look at where he's awesome at and look at where he struggles at. And you can kind of see this ebb and flow or this balance to what he does. And when he's great with his good, he wins. If he's unbelievably great with his weakness, he wins. But to your point, like, you could be your calling card was your ball striking, and you could have hit it on a dime one week and finished fifth because you didn't putt quite as well, or you caught a couple bad breaks, or or whatever it is. And so it goes back to the saying of you don't run into winning, winning runs into you, and you just can't force the issue. And that's what I keep seeing with a lot of these stats. Like, there's just, from a lot of these distances and a lot of these numbers, you cannot force a round peg into a square hole. And if you do, you're going to make a lot of big numbers.
Every time I forced something, I found myself in trouble. And, every time I stuck to the process and was patient enough to stick to and that's a big word. I hope y'all heard what I said. Patient enough, because our expectations causes us to be impatient.
Yep.
And patience is a big quality to have when it comes to a golfer.
For sure.
I mean, when I watched Jack Nicklaus play, he looked like the most patient player I had ever seen. Now, Tiger's a little bit different. Tiger doesn't look patient sometimes, but it's because he's so powerful. Mm-hmm. And
he wouldn't you say he put on his patient more of a Jack Nicklaus look when he ran off and got a lead?
Oh yeah.
And then he kind of cruised around and he was super patient and didn't really force the issue hardly at all at that point.
Well, I would say that Tiger never lost track of wanting to win. I've never seen anybody play that wanted to win all the time. And the rest of the people knew they couldn't win all the time. And, he told Curtis Strange in that interview that you may think I'm crazy, but I'm trying to win every tournament. Yeah. He played like that.
He sure did. All right, so let's get started with this. These stats are pretty heavily based in ball striking, because I think some of these are just they're going to make you think, and we wanted to start there. We're going to talk about putting a little bit too at the end, but we're going to start with ball striking. We're going to start with shorter distances. So the first stat I have written down is approach shots from the fairway from 100 to 125 yards. Okay, I love this one because everybody out there has these distances. Mm-hmm. If we're talking 250, it's not really fair because a lot of guys can't hit it that far. But from 100 to 125 yards, just about everybody can get some wedge or 9-iron to that distance, and the tour players have sand wedges. PGA Tour average from 100 to 125 yards in the middle of in the fairway is 19 feet 10 inches, and all these stats are from 2020. So from we did all these from last year. PGA Tour average is 19 feet 10 inches, and the leader last year was 14 feet 11 inches. So these are the best ball strikers in the world, and the tour average is 19 feet 10 inches. So first thought off the top of your head, what does that mean to you?
Well, I always felt like if I could hit the ball the distance that I wanted, the days that I hit it straight, then I hit it close.
Yeah.
What that means to me is that they probably hit it the correct distance most of the time. They were just left or right of the flag. Now, that could be from where they aimed the ball,
yep,
or that could be from a flaw in the club face,
yep,
or the path.
Yep.
And, they've got different lies. One of the things y'all don't take into consideration is every practice tee that you practice on is flat.
Yep.
And, whatever the wind is doing, it's going to be constant enough when you're practicing that you can kind of plan on that. So you can look real good when you're practicing. You go out on the golf course, you get downhill lie, uphill lie, ball above your feet, ball below your feet. That changes everything.
So to keep defending the PGA Tour player a little bit, where does talk about a little bit of the, where the pins were? Or, we're like when we were at the U.S. Open with Green, there was like one pin that was 5 steps off the edge. Everything else was inside of that. It was 3 or 4. Almost every pin was on edges. Typical for tour events. Everything on the edge.
Yep. Especially with a wedge in your hand.
On holes that par 5s that you couldn't get to into, or short par 4s, they were gonna. So then, let me ask you this: in your opinion, if you look at this stat and say, okay, you put the pin in the middle of the green, what do you think average goes down to? 15 feet? 14 feet? I think it goes down a little bit. Do you think that this average is skewed a little bit just because of pins?
A little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to matter as much on proximity to the hole. But I think it'll matter a lot in greens and regulation.
Okay. So a couple takeaways from this for me is, number one, I think that, well, I know that a lot of our better junior players would lose their mind when they hit a wedge shot to 20 feet.
Yeah.
The other thing I think a lot of people don't realize too is that, a lot of times, I don't know if a lot of people realize just how far 20 feet is. Like just being able to walk off. A lot of people think, oh, that's 12 feet, when in fact it's more like 20, or some people are vice versa. So I think a lot of people's depth perception on that is wrong. But I joke with a lot of our better players. I'm like, look, if you hit the first 10 fairways and you hit the first 10 green, or of the fairways you hit all 10 greens, and you hit your wedge, you got 100 yards and you hit your wedge to 20 feet, again, you would be losing your mind. You get up on the next hole and it's a back left pin with water left. You've got 100 yards in. What are most of the players trying to do? They're going to take dead aim at it. Then they pull it a little bit. They make double, and here we go. Now we're on a downward spiral. Where, again, I think it's so important for everyone at home to just understand that from 100 to 125 yards, if you've got a back left pin and there's trouble left, hit it in the middle of the green and don't allow yourself to make a mistake there. Because, again, these guys on tour aren't hitting it as close as you think they are.
No, they're not. And here's one of the other facts. A lot of what you think about tour players is based on what you see on TV, and what you see on TV is the last 2 or 3 groups that are playing the best.
Yep.
Well, they're bringing the average down.
Yep.
The guys that have got the average up there, and, some of the guys that teed off early, their average is 25 feet.
That's exactly right. So another stat that's really interesting on this, we'll stick to the 100 to 125 yards. From the rough, so fairway was 19 feet 10 inches, just under 20 feet, and leader was 14. From the rough, it goes to 31.5 feet, and it goes to 18 feet for the leader. So the average is 31.5. The leader's at 18. Thoughts?
Well, obviously it's harder to get it close out of the rough. A little bit of a surprising stat is the leader's 18 feet.
Yeah.
It didn't go up nearly as much as
that's right.
as the other. So, I think the point is when you're good at something, it shows. And
well, and you talk about stacking good shot on top of good shot. I think that we could go the other way around and say don't stack bad shots on top of bad shots. So, not saying that a miss in the rough is a bad shot, but if you do hit it in the rough, let's try and get something positive and get the momentum going back on our side, rather than, again, compounding mistakes. Get the dang thing on the green, get it moving.
Well, that was me. Every time I hit it in the rough, I wasn't thinking close to the hole. I was thinking get it on the green somehow. And, you got flyers coming out of the rough.
Oh, yeah.
You got all sorts of things that make
judge.
it so much harder to judge.
Correct, especially now the ball doesn't spin as much.
Right.
Okay, so staying on this, greens hit in regulation percentage from 100 to 125 yards is 75% average. So they're missing 1 out of 4 greens from that distance.
Well, that's where, in most cases, that's because the pin is tucked and they're seeking the pin.
Firing at it, yeah.
They're firing at the pin, and, when the pandemic came along, they took all the flags, and some of my friends that play over here at Champions, I said, you're going to start hitting more greens and shooting lower scores.
Yep.
They didn't even know where the hole was. They took the pin out. I said, because you don't know where it is, you're going to hit it in the center of the green, and every one of them played better. Not a single one. And guess what? As soon as they started putting that pin back in the green, they started firing back at the flags, and now they're missing greens.
And it goes back to, again, we're a fan of Fawcett's stuff, but it goes back to this idea of the shotgun approach. Like we're just, again, you're seeing it with some of these stats, but no one is quite good enough to keep from having a miss that's a little long left or a little short right. And so, again, you aim at a front right pin and miss it just a little bit, it comes up short, just like we saw in the playoff with it was Harris English, right? With Kramer? Yeah, with Harris in the second hole on 18, the second playoff hole. He's got 100 yards in, plugs it in the bunker. Like he literally, it was an unbelievable up and down, but could have lost the tournament. Saw it again with what's her face, the Lexi Thompson at the
US
San
Open.
Francisco, at Olympic. I mean, she's got 85 yards in, and the pin's front, and she mishit it just a little bit and left in the bunker and ended up missing the playoff. And so it's it's the old adage, aim to the middle of the green. But again, if you're a 10 handicap out there, take like what Hal said, take the flag out, get it on the green. Because the other thing, we don't have a whole lot of stats on the short game, but the tour average on getting up and down from 30 yards and in is like just under 60%. So if you miss the green, or if tour players miss the green, they're only getting up and down just over half the time. So if you miss the green from 5 yards or 10 yards or 15 yards, like now you're going to chip it to 8 feet, and your make percentage from 8 feet is 50%. Like the odds are not in your favor on these things. So as tempting as that back left or back right pin is, get it on the surface, have a 15-footer, and take your chances.
Well, it goes back to many things: knowing your game and then being patient, playing to your strengths and away from your weaknesses. Nobody did that better than Jack Nicklaus.
Yep. So here's a stat: it's relative to par. So approaches 100 to 125 yards relative to par. So if you had 100 or 100 shots on the PGA Tour last year from this distance, and you parred every one of them, you would be even par. Okay, tour average is 0.15 shots under par.
So 15 under par on 100.
100 shots, so they're birdieing 15% of the time. Again, when I was 25 years old, I would have never guessed that number was that low. I would have guessed they birdied half. It's a 100-yard wedge shot. They're that good. You guys were that good. You'd hit it to 5 feet and make your putt every time. It just doesn't.
So let's clarify that. There were weeks that you beat that average.
Yeah.
I mean, there were weeks that with your wedge, you get it inside 100 yards. It seemed like every time you did, you had a 10-footer.
Yep.
But that's that 1 or 2 weeks or that you're on the money,
And they show you those weeks, and they don't on the other weeks.
That's exactly right.
And then from the rough, so that first one, you guys were 0.15 under par, so 15% of the time you made birdie. The leader was 38%, so just under 40% they're making birdie from 100 to 125 yards. So a great wedge play, a Vaughn Taylor type, a Steve Stricker type. From the rough, tour average is basically level, but it's 0.05 over par. So from the rough, from 100 to 125 yards, they're playing at over par average. Leader was just under 30% under par. It's interesting. So it's so interesting. I told you this multiple times, but I wish I'd had these stats just to see, like, if you hit it in the rough, you got 100 to 125 yards in the rough in general, but just like you said, get it on the green. Don't try and take on anything more than you need to, because you just can't control the golf ball that well.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, so what does all this mean?
Yep.
And I think it's time to address that. To me, does this mean take the heat off of yourself for being as good as you can be? It has nothing to do with that. Does this mean I need to be in the game on each and every shot if I want to be as good as I can be? That's exactly what it means.
Sure.
I mean, you've got to assess each shot. What are the possibilities here? And that's what Scott Fawcett, basically preaches. Mm-hmm. Understand the risk reward of each shot, not just occasionally.
Yep.
And don't get caught with your pants down, so to speak, not thinking about what is the right play.
Yep.
And that's what tour players do better than most everybody else. Once they get out there and they realize they got to make money at this, or if they don't, they're going to spend a bunch of money and make nothing. Sure. They start to learn hey, I got to manage each and every shot. Did
Raymond Floyd ever talk to you? Because you mentioned, for you new listeners out there, Hal mentioned how kind of Raymond took him under his wing starting out, took you under your wing starting out. Did Raymond ever talk to you about, I don't think I've ever asked you this question, did he ever talk to you about, making pars versus trying to make birdies versus not making bogeys? Did you ever recall a conversation about that specifically?
No, not specifically about that, but I had a stretch in 85 and 86 where I won like 5 or 6 times in a 10-month period of time.
Yeah.
And I had a caddy. At the time, it wasn't Freddie, my regular caddy. It was another guy who was a really good player. And he basically had this thing. He'd pick out every hole, and he'd say, Hal, par is golden here this week. No matter what you hit off the tee, no matter what you hit into the green, par is golden. That's what he used to tell me. And he reminded me of that before I ever got to that hole. There were holes that I was, felt freer to challenge.
Yeah.
And then there's other holes that I had no business challenging.
Right.
He recognized that and reminded me of that before I ever got. So my shot selection on each one of those holes was conservative.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wasn't trying to tear a pin out of the hole, or I wasn't trying to hit it as far as I could necessarily.
Right.
Trying to make sure that my approach shot was from the fairway.
Sure.
And at the center of the green.
And I think it's interesting when we have 10 handicaps come in here and talk about how they, you know, they need to make more birdies, or they don't make enough birdies. And I kind of want to again push them towards saying, no, you make too many bogeys.
Right.
My dad would always say this, and it used to drive me crazy. Chase, even par is a good score. Even par is a good score. You go shoot even par, you know. And at the time too, they'd always do the money leader, or the money, how much money you would win if you shot even par at every tour event. Now it's getting to be where you're kind of borderline, but there's always an event, a U.S. Open, a British Open, the majors. You always do a little bit better than you would at a typical event. But again, I go back and look at how many rounds I shot 70 with 2 doubles, or I shot 69 with a triple, or like just these big mistakes, because I was always kind of pedal to the metal, and I could shoot some low numbers, but again, I just wasn't as. I needed to be more boring, and all the guys I played with in college that were great, that turned out to be great. I remember Chris Stroud. I played 3 or 4 times with Chris. I was like, he's so boring. He hits it down the fairway, hits on the green. And he didn't. I mean, I felt like I could hit it as good as him when I was hitting it good and could do all this stuff. But he wore the golf course out because he never put himself in too much trouble. Play a lot like you did, you know, just kind of hit it here, hit it there, see if you can get a putt to fall, see if you can take advantage of length on a par 5, take advantage of a wedge in your hand. But don't put yourself in harm's way too much.
Well, and just because we say that doesn't mean you're always going to avoid trouble. Yeah. I'm a good example of that is when I beat Tiger at TPC, I tripled 17 on Saturday. I had a 4-shot lead, hit a good shot into the 17th green, carried it a foot too far. Bounced over the green, went in the water. That's just something that happens. At TPC, when you're in the last group and you get there on 17, it could be hard when the pin's in the back.
Sure.
Didn't keep me from winning the golf tournament, but, you know, you're not going to take out everything just because you understand these stats.
Yeah. Yeah.
You still, you know, there's luck, there's a lot of things that go into golf. And you make decisions as best you can when it comes to risk and reward, yep. And you just try to manage it one shot at a time.
Each shot is its own special computer little equation. You send in the data and it spits it out, and you try to execute that to the best of your ability. You know,
that's really a great way to put it. Some people don't put anything in before they hit the shot,
yep.
And that's something right there y'all all need. The difference between a tour player and an average player is he's got a caddy that's reminding him of things. He is reminding himself of things.
He's got his own stats.
He's got his own stats. He knows what he's capable of, and he's making a decision before each shot based on that. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, everybody out there listening, you're not making a decision before you hit every shot. You're just leaving it to chance. Yep. And I can tell you, you're not going to get much out of it that way.
Yep. And then I think the next thing that's got to be said that we've hinted at a little bit is assessing the outcome after the fact and saying, are you a terrible wedge player, or are you a terrible putter, or what, you know, the inventory side of this whole thing that's so important. Or are you hitting it to 15 feet or hit a bunch of wedge shots to 15 feet and you're actually a pretty good wedge player? You just have unrealistic expectations thinking you should hit it to 5 feet on every hole or on every wedge shot. And it just doesn't happen.
You know, one of the things that I want to bring up because of making decisions before each shot, if you don't make a decision before each shot, there's no failure.
Yeah.
But if you make a decision, you want to call the pocket. If you don't hit the pocket, then you're going to have to deal with, I didn't do what I tried to do. Mm-hmm. Exactly, and most people don't want to deal with that. So if they don't make a decision, they never have to deal with that.
Exactly right. So next step would be 150 to 175. So for tour players, we're looking at pitching wedges to 7 irons. Some are kind of, and most guys are hitting 8 iron from 175 now. PGA Tour average is 27 feet 9 inches, and the leader was at 22 feet 11 inches. So this is from the fairway, 150 to 175 yards. Again, 28 feet and 23 feet.
Well, the further out they get,
it's going to keep
proximity to the hole is going to get further.
Going to keep moving that way. So for you, you know, you're at the famous shot. How far did you have in on 18 at
178 yards.
Yeah, so it was just a good solid 6 iron.
It was a good 6 iron for me. Imagine that they're hitting 8 irons now, but
yeah, good solid 6 iron, about the same loft. one of the things you really got me thinking about when we first got together at Big Easy was moving the flag stick. Talk a little bit about, because again, to me, that stat says they're only hitting it to 28 feet. So, again, if the flag's back left at Sawgrass on 18 and you got 6-iron in, I mean, you need to be aiming 35, almost 40 feet right at that flag. So how did you do that? Because a lot of people can't do it. They have a hard time doing it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't do that. And here's the other thing: they sometimes do that in their mind, and then their last look, they look at the flag instead of where the decision that they made to hit
so
it.
Subconscious, it's left, and they'll pull it. They'll pull it online
exactly.
or overcook it or whatever.
So, I mean, your brain is going to try to do whatever you feed it last. That's basically the truth. So you can make a decision to aim at front right, and the pin is back left. And if your last look is at the back left pin, your brain says, hey, I know you said you want to hit it over here to the right, but the pin's on the back left.
Conflicting signals.
So you're going to overcook it and get it back there, or pull it too much trying. And, that's what I mean by being decisive. Whatever you're going to do, make a decision and stick to the plan. Don't decommit. And I'm not even sure if that's a word or not.
Yeah, right.
But don't decommit. And we see this all the time in putting. A person gets up or a putt, it's breaking 3 or 4 inches to the right. They get up there and they don't quite, they don't see that much break or whatever, and they kind of just decommit, deaccelerate, and miss it low right. I mean, whatever you decide, see it through to the end.
Some interesting stats here with the 150 to 175. The relative to par stats. So how 100 shots. How are they? They're about level par. They're 0.03 shots under par from the fairway. They're almost 0.2 shots over par. So 20% of the time from 150 to 175, they're going to make bogey. 8 out of 10, they're going to par. The other 20, other 2 times they're going to make bogey. I thought that was pretty interesting. And this is one thing, Scott, when I saw his first seminar, he said just how penal the rough is, how much less control we have out of the rough. Birdie or better percentages, they're not that far off from 100 to 125. They're just under 15%. So those numbers were pretty similar. They're not way better with wedges than they are with a 9-iron. They're still their scoring clubs, as we like to say. But again, they're not hitting it to 5 feet on every shot from 150. They're just not.
That's what they long to do. That's what they practice to do, but that's not what anybody ever does.
Yep.
And, I'll never forget the story that Jackie Burke told me about when Butch Harmon first called him about Tiger Woods. Tiger was going to go see Butch.
Yeah.
And Butch and Jackie Burke were pretty good friends, and the story's been told, true or not. But Butch called Jackie and asked him what he would do if Tiger called him. He said, I'd put a bit in his mouth. And Butch says, what do you mean by that? He said, he's got to control his short irons. He can't control his short irons. And, those are your scoring irons.
Yeah.
And you need to give yourself as many opportunities as you can out of that. But as you can see, the best players in the world are not giving themselves the scoring opportunities that you think they're giving themselves.
Didn't you say one time that you paid more attention to greens hit and regulation than you did just about any other stat? Wasn't that kind of your...
That was my barometer of whether I was managing my game correctly.
Yeah.
I felt like if I hit enough greens, I was going to get enough opportunities.
Yeah.
Over the whole course of a year, I'd have opportunities to win.
Yeah.
But if I wasn't hitting greens, I wasn't the best chipper in the world. And so I didn't need to put myself in that situation.
Sure. Again, 60% of the time you're going to get it up and down. Interesting stat on greens hit. So in 2020, PGA Tour average for greens hit and regulation was 66%. So roughly they hit between 10 and 11 greens around. And I think that, to me, that was always my, the easier the golf course, I was always trying to shoot for 13 or 14. I was trying to get kind of to that level. Obviously, you guys played harder courses, and so some of them you're going to have longer clubs and all this stuff than some of the guys at home. But again, if you're a 15 handicap trying to get to 10, get on the green. Try to get from 6 greens around to 8 greens around, and your scores, it'll be hard for your scores not to come down.
Well, when I was, playing well, 13 greens was the barometer that I had. If I hit 12, I was a little disappointed. If I could hit 13, I knew I was going to have a lot of birdie putts.
Sure. And the leader in greens hit in 2020 was at 74%, so roughly 14, 15 greens, just under 15. So you're right on track with that. Interesting stat. I thought this was pretty interesting. Average putting distance for all one putts. So in 2020, if you were a PGA Tour player and you one putted the green, they would enter in all those numbers and then come out with an average. The average was 7 feet 3 inches. The leader was at 9 feet 1 inch. Not 15 feet. You're just not making a ton of those putts on the best. And these are the best putters in the world, and on the best greens in the world.
Yeah, but that's all of them.
Yep.
And the reason why it's skewed in your mind is because TV is showing you those guys,
The cool stuff.
the
Yep.
cool stuff, the TV worthy stuff.
Yep.
You know, if TV could only show the first group that goes out on Sunday, you wouldn't be nearly as impressed.
Yeah. 3-putt avoidance. Over 25 feet, Tour players 3-putt 10% of the time. The leader was at 3%. Thought that was pretty interesting.
Over 25 feet?
Over 25 feet. So it's a little bit generalized, meaning that could include a 75-footer. But anything over 25 feet, Tour average 3-putt was about 10%. So this is the one hard part with greens hitting regulation. If you're hitting 16 greens around, but you have 35 and 50 footers all day, you're gonna 3-putt some. You just can't.
You know, one of the things that I like to do, sometimes I'll ask a kid in here if they ever 3-putt.
Yeah.
I don't like it when they tell me they never 3-putt, because that means they're not trying to make the first putt sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can't avoid 3-putting.
Yeah.
If you play enough golf, you're going to 3-putt, and especially if you try to make the first putt. And you know, I just did a bunch of putting lessons while I was gone on this last trip, and I talked about your intent. And I had 15 footers that I was having people try to putt. Almost no one told me that they intentionally made a decision to try to make the putt. None of them wanted to make it. They just didn't want to 3-putt.
Yeah.
And the chances of you making it if you're not trying to make it is slim and none. Slim's out of town.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Well, we talk about this too, trying not to do something versus trying to do something.
Right. Tiger tried to make every 15-footer he had.
Yeah.
He
was trying to hit it on his correct line and his correct speed.
That's exactly right.
Intended line and intended speed.
I mean, he had a plan, and he tried to execute the plan.
Yeah. So to that point, perfect segue. Putts, this was interesting too. Putts made over 20 feet per event. So it's a 4-day event. Number of putts on average, players made over 20 feet. The average was 1.2. So over a 4-day event, 72 holes, they were making 1.2 putts over 20 feet. The leader was double that. The leader was at 2.5.
And think about how many putts y'all see people make on TV on Sunday afternoon.
They make everything.
It looks like they're making everything.
Yeah.
But the truth is, the overall truth of what happened on Sunday is more to that average there.
That's exactly right. The last putting stat I have is make percentage from 8 feet, which we've talked about on here. Average is just over 50%. So that's our 50-50 number when it comes to, you know, where you're supposed to make half of your putts. It's right around 8.5 feet.
So the one thing that doesn't include is break lines or, you know, breaks. So that's just
it's all 8-footers.
It's all 8-footers. So, you know, if every putt they hit was uphill and straight, that percentage would be a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
But that's not golf. We all know that. It's kind of like I mentioned before. Not all of these wedge shots are off of flat lies and knowing exactly where the wind is going like you practice every day. So the golf course is completely different than the practice tee. And a lot of things that people are basing what they do on the golf course is like in here.
Yep.
It's a perfect environment in here. So
takeaways. Let's kind of recap this a little bit. For a mini tour player, seeing these stats for you know, I'm 36 now, I think 36. For me, 10 years ago when I was still trying to play, one of the takeaways I would have, and it's a line you've used in the past, is Chase, you can't shoot 65 on the first tee. You know, I played in a lot of events where 25, 26, 27 under won. And, you know, I'd play in the afternoon and somebody would shoot 8 or 9 or 10 under the first round, and you'd see the leaderboard, and it's like, you kind of got to get geared up and get going. And if I could go back, I would have made myself be more patient worked my way into a round and been just fine shooting a bunch of 70s and 69s and just been more patient overall with my game, not tried to force the issue so much, because I took on too, again, I've told you I shot 72, 62, 80 in a tournament one time, and it was like I was feast or famine. I went at everything, and when I was good, I could take it deep, and when I wasn't, I couldn't. And I needed to do a better job of managing. What would your, a little bit of your takeaway from this be for the mini tour player or the really good player listening at home?
I say it all the time: string one good shot next to another good shot next to another good shot.
Yeah.
And by that, what I mean is make a good decision and then just try to execute the shot. That's all you can do, is do this one shot at a time. One of the things that I never tried to do was I never really wanted to look at, if I played on Thursday afternoon, I never looked at the scores that people were shooting on Thursday morning, because I couldn't do anything about that.
Sure.
All I could do something about was that first shot off the first tee.
What about, did you ever look at cut line?
Only Friday, if I was playing, I knew what it was before, because I'd read the paper and I knew where the 70 and ties was at. Yeah. So I knew, I needed to know where that was in case I come down to the last hole, but it didn't affect how I was playing, hole 19 to 35.
Yeah. Might change your, approach if you're on 16, 17, 18 and have to adjust a little bit.
Might have to go for a par 5 and 2 that I might not have intended to necessarily, or, might need to make that that birdie putt from 15 feet on the last hole.
Sure. What's a good takeaway for our high handicap golfers for this, a little recap for them too?
Well, this is redundant. I say it all the time, one shot at a time. Stack one shot on top of another shot on top of another. Don't preconceive some score that you need to shoot. Don't have some overall game plan that you're, other than maybe I want to drive it in the fairway and I want to hit it on the green. Yeah. Something real simple, I'll reiterate, during the pandemic, guys, aimed at the middle of the green and shot better scores.
Mm-hmm. I love when a student comes in and they say, I shot my lowest round last time they went out and played, and I love talking to them about that round, because always they get that, man, I was locked in. I was solid through 12 or 13 holes, 14 holes, like mentally locked in, right?
Right.
And then they get to 15 or 16 and something happens. Either they hit a great shot or they even hit a kind of a mediocre one, and it's like, oh man, if I can keep this going, if I par out, if I do this, if I do that. Again, getting too result oriented and not process oriented, and then that's when the demons start to play around with you a little bit. And it's always fascinating because it happens to us all. It's hard not to, but it's just what we're striving to do. And I think for the 10, 15, 20 handicap, again, as we say all the time, take great inventory, figure out where your strengths and weaknesses lie. You guys have to do a better job of that. And then the second thing is quit beating yourself up by not hitting wedges to 10 feet on every hole, because the guys just aren't doing it. It's just not realistic.
No, it's not. There's a lot of milestones in golf. I can remember when I was young and trying to break 100 the first time, and just how elated I felt when I broke 100, and how my whole game had to change to break 90.
Yeah.
And then you start trying to break 80. Then you have to have a complete different sort of game skills, and then breaking par is a whole nother ball of wax. And once you get to that point, then you start thinking about breaking course records. And the development of the mental game all the way through that process and how you handle that. And you think back to when you've watched on TV guys that were trying to break 60, and trust me, they're not trying to, you didn't see any of those guys give up and make bogeys or anything. They just didn't make the birdie on the last hole, or they did.
Yeah, that's right. And it goes to, you mentioned the mental game too. It goes to show like 100 to 80 is way more physical than 80 to 70 is, and then 70 to 60 is.
Oh my goodness.
There's little physical things you can work on, but it's all how you manage all this stuff, managing expectations, how you manage great, how you manage bad rounds, how you can compose and handle yourself.
Yeah, well, you just said it best. When I was trying to break 100 and trying to break 90, I had physical problems that I was trying to overcome. When I started breaking 80 and par, well, then it was more mental demons that I was trying to overcome than it was physical demons.
Sure. Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. This was one that we've been talking about doing for a little while now. Again, all these stats are available to you. Go to pgatour.com. You can look at any of them. And again, like we mentioned earlier too, take a look at your favorite player. Go see what they do great and what they struggle with and whatnot. And you can kind of see how they win and when they don't win and the how they play some of the certain courses better than say other courses. I think it's a great way to to see their inventory of their game with the stats that some of you guys don't have access to. Hal, as always, thank you, sir. These are fun.
Yeah, these are fun. I enjoyed it. Y'all check us out. Hal Sutton Golf, Chase Cooper Golf. We're on social media. We're talking to you golfers all the time. Stay tuned.
Be the right club today. Yes!